Sonic the Continuation, Issue 11. We start out with Grimer at the gun headquarters saying that prototype production lines of the new robots are in full swing, and he says that it's ironic that they have the head of Commander Brutus, the would-be tyrant, to thank for it. So he's actually honest with them about Brutus's history. Why would he do that? Is he actually the head of that same Brutus? Why would his head still be around after all of that time? He was turned into ice and shattered. Even if he could be uniced, he obviously would have been turned into scrap metal and reused for other robots a long time ago. Huge before issue 100. This literally is the Croctobot continuity error. I assumed it was a brand new robot he just built that just happened to look like Brutus's head, because that was common sense after all of that time. The robot designs inside of his head are helping advance the military forces of Gun. This is so convoluted. Grimer's the one who invented all of those robots. Why the hell would they need Brutus's head for that? They have Grimer. There's a reason I assumed he was going to be just a battle robot of Grimer's and nothing else. And at least this tries to explain how all those gun robots came to be for SC2, but also does so in a way that's so confusing that it wasn't worth it. I was perfectly fine assuming that Gun had that advanced technology because it was the military. It was pretty advanced 50 years ago. Sonic X explained that it stole Eggman's robot designs. It'll only be one more week before Gun will be able to begin large-scale production in the robot factories. And by then they'll have the new satellite cloud system up and running, and wide-scale automated production of all robots can go full ahead. And what makes Gun think that Grimer won't program them all to obey him in his efforts to conquer the world? If he's the only one programming them and nobody's looking over the programming. Especially if it's not literally just the designs of the robots that come from Brutus, but it's programming too. At least in Sad EM, while Robotnik had been trusted to make swap bots to help him on Metropolis, the king didn't know he was evil yet. Grimer's crimes are on public record, and the gun commander doesn't even like him. I understand why I'd want to take advantage of his genius, of course, but you'd think he'd be supervised better. I can't help but find it tense and exciting that Grimer's obviously going to want to do this with the robots, and at least conquer the humans. But we already know how he'd run the world, because how Robotnik made life for citizens was covered pretty extensively already. All of these problems because we're unnecessarily shown these pages just because they got Grimer's help in something they could do themselves. And you'd think something like the military that kills people more is no problem would immediately think to put some kind of leash on Grimer to immediately disable him if he went rogue. They could have a bomb in him, like Rouge had when employed by Gun and Sonic X. But I guess that won't be the case, because if they were written to have any common sense like that, instead of completely trusting him, he wouldn't be able to be a huge threat later for more than a second. Grimer says that Diabolon will be ready in the next 24 hours, and there's a cloud satellite in orbit, and Grimer says that the Gun military will be invincible. Then after an overly vague page that's way too much in the shadows, the Gun commander fortunately explains that something crashed through their satellite, and crash-landed in Alaska's ice field. At least it's unique to have Sonic Unleashed geography referenced in an SC2 adaptation, or more like an SC2 prologue. He tells Topaz and Rouge that they're his best, so he wants them to secure the site before anyone finds out, because the thing slammed through their space technology like it was made of cardboard. Then someone in the shadows says that his retirement has come to an end, because if he just leaves this to Gun, that'll backfire because they're too aggressive. It's a blue hedgehog and seems to have a mustache. So is that Uncle Chuck? Another risk being taken with the supposed Fleetway fan comic. I did complain when SEC cowardly refused to give Sonic a grandfather and made him his aged up clone instead. So this kind of thing is long overdue. How would Sonic exist if he didn't have any relatives? But combined with the Heroes' base not being an Emerald Hill Zone anymore, and this comic is starting to be far more of an Archie comic than a Fleetway one. Max Gamble hasn't shown up yet, and he was used in Sonic the Comic Online, for example. Like, Max had a lot of stories where he fought Tails. They even brought back a bunch of minor villains for a story in SSC Online. But at least this gives this fan comic a unique identity, as more of an Archie Fleetway hybrid. And now Sonic X is included. Then we see Amy teaching Sally how to kick, since that wasn't something anybody ever would know how to do, apparently. Sally says that her self-defense classes didn't prepare her for this. I thought she was taking them from Amy. She is, but the fact that she already took self-defense classes just makes her unpreparedness for this a lot more confusing. Sally says that fighting comes naturally to Amy and it must be in her blood. And surprisingly, this worries Amy, and she says that something came up the other day. Amy says that she and Sonic had some tests done. And she says that Sonic got a tip that Robotnik was up to no good in the special zone and went to check it out. Makes sense since he used to have a base there, so why did he ever abandon it? Amy says it could be their chance to get Kintobor back. Amy says that they could always use more recruits. And then a robot with an indescribable appearance says to Amy that they need to talk about a huge crisis immediately. This is certainly an engaging comic. I love how Amy's dressed, by the way. Amy says that this isn't like any badnik she ever saw, and it's just a drone that a guy named Charlie is speaking through, and he hesitates as he says his name's Charlie, like he was about to say Chuck. Totally not Chuck. Logically, unless he was a selfish person who gladly went to hiding, why on earth would a master scientist like Uncle Chuck not be fighting Robotnik in all this time and only now reveal himself? I guess he did research and assumed that Sonic had a handle on it and he could just relax and do his own thing. Or he assumed that doesn't matter anyways. Both of which are the kinds of attitudes I'd expect Rick Sanchez to have. I can't help but think of him as an anti-hero right now because I'm just wondering why he wasn't raising Sonic. Chuck isn't totally pure good all the time. I remember when Sonic was mad at him and Archie for not telling him that his parents were still alive and just roboticized. For the smart reason that he wouldn't have stopped to think straight until they were free and he'd be killed by it. So his intelligence can lead him to make decisions Sonic would disagree with. Like when he made that Neo Metal Sonic army. I'm open to something new being done with the character. As long as the character's comment on it is not a total Karma Houdini. I say this because him hiding in retirement instead of fighting Robotnik makes him come off like someone who did something wrong. So he needs to hide. And he did do something wrong by not being there for Sonic for no apparent reason. The only explanation I can think of for why he doesn't want the heroes to find out his name is that obviously he doesn't want Sonic to be mad at him. And I find that intriguing. He says that he used to send the Freedom Fighters tactical information through the Kintobor computer during Robotnik's rule. Oh, that's convenient. I always thought Kintobor got that information himself, because he's this amazing computer who has sensors all over the place. So it doesn't really feel like he was helping the Freedom Fighters if he's just doing something that Kintobor could have done himself. That's not noticeable. Amy says that Kintobor did say he had some contacts. Did he? If he sent the Freedom Fighters metal that they could use to make technology, that would have been impressive. If he had been the true inventor of Megatol, or helped Tekno make Megatol, that would have been impressive. He says that he sent this drone so he can speak with him quickly, and tells them to go to the Aurora ice field immediately, because they could be facing an alien invasion of the Black Arms or the Metrics. It'd feel more out of nowhere if it was a totally new alien race. But at least it's happening so close to SA2 is new. Considering the BEM figured out how to make a world roboticizer, and we're at world deroboticizer technology back when Tails was a kid. So, roboticization technology is like alien level technology, and it's also Chuck level technology. It kind of makes sense to associate Chuck with aliens, or like have him immediately figure out that this has got to be an alien invasion. I can't even tell who these two people in the blizzard are. I guess it's Rouge, come to think of it. Because she says that she used to be a sky pirate and calls someone a misspelled honey. And she says that high up enough, it's even colder than this. So she thinks this is tanning weather in comparison. This is at least unique of Rouge. It's good that she's got winter clothes, even though she's just said she's used to the cold. They even cover her ears. Surprisingly, Topaz angsts that they've been sent here because they're expendable, even though they were called Gun's Best. I find this surprising because I thought she was a really loyal gun soldier, and yet she immediately figures this out. Like she's already getting cynical and sick of her job. She complains that Halaska is outside gun jurisdiction and the commander doesn't want to cause an incident, and yet, Topaz has her duty to be fine with being threatened. Rouge says that as long as she keeps her great paycheck, she'll be fine with it too. Wait, why doesn't Gun just send robots? If militaries invented, like, combat robots in real life, well, robots would be expensive to make. So it does make sense that they would have human soldiers as well because they're cheaper. Topaz isn't impressed with Rouge because she's greedy. So for once this feels like Sonic X instead of her just being here as a cameo. because the last time she showed up, Topaz could have looked like some random soldier for all difference it made. Then after they get threatened by someone or something that finds their bickering amusing, a laser is fired, Rouge throws a bomb and they make a retreat, and the bad guy says crazy dialogue that he loves being hugged so hard. With that one round jewel for an eye, he reminds me of the Metrics. You know it's more creative to come up with your own ideas, right? It makes me suspect that the real reason the fan comics using ideas from so many different continuities is to avoid thinking up new ideas at all costs, which a professional will be creative enough to not want to do. It's still interesting to see this idea be applied to a new context, but it's still just old ideas. I mean, it's hard to believe he would use the Metrics just because he likes the Metrics, because who likes the Metrics? Like, they're just bad guys. So the girls retreat, and we see Amy piloting a flying escape pod as she's told that she wouldn't have been contacted if this wasn't an emergency. They find a crashed spaceship, with the coordinates being a little off. He says that with the way the gun officers were reacting to it, he expected the spaceship to be bigger. Go figure, Cosmo was in the pod. And she wakes up uninjured and fine. They should have said it was crashed then. It clearly landed safely. It's relatable of Sally to ask what her home planet is like. And missed opportunities because she doesn't tell her what her home planet's like. That would have required thinking up what it would be like. She asks where her big brother is, and Amy isn't happy to see Rouge. And then the Metric shows up behind them, talking in a crazy way in a desperate failed attempt to make up for how boring he looks. He must be really competent at his job if he was considered worthy in spite of how weird he is. Cosmo's scared that Aspen followed them. It's completely miraculous that Amy immediately recognizes the name Aspen as the name of a tree. Aspen just makes me think of asp, which is a snake. He sarcastically thanks Cosmo, calling her a runaway, and says that he worked hard to earn that color rank of gray. Cosmo calls out for a big brother, and Amy wants to use the drone as a weapon against this robot, whose technology even impresses Chuck, taking advantage of it being a scientist. Aspen just wants to take Cosmo home. It's so stilted that Cosmo calls out for a big brother so much instead of just saying his name. It makes it harder to take it seriously that she calls him Big Brother. It was already kind of weird in Wind Waker. Little sisters don't actually say that. Then a light beam shows up, and Aspen gets attacked by Cosmo's older brother, White Elm, the Paladin Metrics. So he looks like a robot, but he's a good guy? And yet Cosmo isn't a robot and looks nothing like him. In Sonic X, the robot ones and non-robot ones were enemies. That was easier to understand. This issue by Akira was a surprising one, where after it's revealed that Grimer started mass robot production for Gun, even though Colonel Granite had robots himself, so the humans were capable of making robots on their own. Their satellite gets immediately damaged by a crashing alien spaceship from the Metrics of all things, which is at least applying the concept to a brand new context. It'd be really boring if it was nothing but a straight SE2 adaptation instead of getting distracted with something out of left field. It would have been harder to convince myself to read it if it was just the same thing. So all of a sudden Uncle Chuck comes out of retirement and tells Amy through a drone that she needs to go to Halaska and help Topaz and Rouge, because they're going to get attacked by the Metrics. And Elasis knew that Cosmo is a big brother. She's suited to the little sister role incredibly well. Next up is going to be Tekno Invasive Procedures. Why did he ever go into retirement in the first place? Because it can't be because of old age, because you'd think that if Chuck is such a genius, you'd think he'd be able to solve any kind of old age problem. We know he made a roboticizer in SAT-AM. You can't grow old if you're a robot. There are robots that look just like organic beings in Archie, so you can make yourself a robot and have yourself not look like a robot. And not to mention he could make himself a cyborg as well. Tekno Invasive Procedures. It starts out with Tekno reminding Sonic and Amy that they were both altered by Eggman earlier to become the way they are today, and her referencing that Amy's eyes turned green directly puts this issue after issue 10. What she should be mentioning is that Knuckles was in Chaos as well, and his eyes didn't turn green. So that's why it's so suspicious. That's probably why she says that Amy and Sonic's skills and bodies over time are so similar that she wants to give them both an extensive physical to study them. And the story has comedy at her expense because she scares him with the large needle, and she even calls it comically absurd. It's like she doesn't care whether she scares him or not, and is just playing around. That's something I'd expect Rick to do, never Tekno. But at least this gives her a personality, where she's joking around. Usually I just remember her as a bland, nice girl, and can't remember anything about her personality besides she's smart. And serious. She thankfully apologizes to them right afterwards and says she was just joking, and says she's been dying to use this prop as a joke for ages. Amy sarcastically says that was hilarious, looking just as snarky as Sonic, which is good. I definitely like Tekno better with a sense of humor. Sonic says they have better things to do than this checkup. And out of nowhere, Tekno reveals that Porker is scared in a hospital bed because he's still recovering from an encounter with Chaos in Angel Island. It makes sense when you think about it because he was traumatized by being kidnapped by the Mentalics for a month, and Johnny's death to Chaos would have done the same thing. Naturally, he would have been scared that another person would die to Chaos. So is the plot going to get started at some point? Because this is just character moments. Tekno gets Amy and Sonic to stand in pods since they're stuck with her, and says that the purpose of the pod is to scan a life form's entire physical structure so that they could use its organic battery for the appropriate badnik. Huh? Why? It would make more sense if this thing was a bioanalyzer, even though there aren't roboticizers in this comic. We clearly saw in the earliest of Sonic the Comic that literally all that had to happen was for someone like Sonic to be put inside of a badnik, and they'd be used to a badnik no problem. They never needed any pods. That's a continuity error. It was so close. It could have made sense if she said that this pod was for making a Metal Sonic based off Sonic. Tekno's excited and starts the process, and Sonic says his insides are twitching, which is a bit more thought out. And Amy shows her good friendship with Tekno for once in a fan comic, telling him to just let Tekno have her fun and examine a big mystery. I say fan comic because there wasn't nearly enough focus on Amy Tekno's friendship in SEC Online, and this comic doesn't really help either. Sonic says that them both having green eyes doesn't make them related or anything. Then Tekno is shocked at being told that they're a 90% biological match. Huh? And she's shocked because there isn't a geneticist on the planet capable of this. This is a bizarre, ass-pull surprise. Sonic wouldn't say sweet Sega as an interjection. Nobody would. Why does it keep doing this? It's pretty tone-breaking. So apparently, the two of them have so much in common genetically that they could be considered clones of each other. But not really, because they don't look like each other at all, and she should know that. She should be smart enough to know what a clone is. Like, why is Amy's hair pink while Sonic's hair is blue then? Although they did both have brown hair to start with. But why was Amy affected differently so that she'd have pink hair? It has to be because their DNA is different. If they were clones, they'd look identical, or at least have the same hair color. But apparently, they're clones that are just fairly different enough. Now, at least this is memorable, and very gutsy considering the widespread Saw and Amy ship. But I don't consider this to be canon to Sonic the Continuation. At least not when it's not even explained. It just seems like nonsense if it just comes out of complete nowhere. She says their DNA was altered so that they have shared traits, and it could take her years to decode the manipulation. But then she tells Sonic and Amy that they need to do some checking to their family lines, if they have any. Because these readings seem to indicate that they were both born inside of a test tube. How could the readings prove that? Regardless of how people will be formed and born, the fact would remain that they'd still be people, and people have to be made from male and female genetic material. So they'd be identified as having a mother and a father. So while they are similar apparently, how would you know they were literally made from test tubes? Wouldn't test tube petri dish babies be indistinguishable from other people? For example, maybe from Arrested Development was made that way out of necessity. She didn't seem that different from other humans. Her point though is that whoever created the genetic code was a genius the likes of which scares her. It can't be Kintobor, or else he would have recognized Sonic. And it's pretty shady of that genius to make children just to abandon them instead of raise them. Sonic didn't seem to have anyone raising him when he met Kintobor. Maybe he hated him so much that he ran away. Maybe Sonic ran away from home and Chuck respected his decision instead of going to get him. Maybe the reason Sonic was so confusingly nonchalant about Kintobor's science experiments was that he was already used to Chuck's. Since I've read issue 11, I know that Uncle Chuck is a character in Sonic the Continuation. So maybe it's him. Like, the best case scenario, Sonic was being raised by him. He did try to raise Sonic, and then he ran away from him because, like, he's a scientist, and maybe he scared him because of his experiments. It doesn't offend me that she'd be scared of his intelligence, because I've watched Rick and Morty and started becoming fascinated by the idea that maybe Scourge's Uncle Chuck is like Rick. Chuck's smart enough to make a roboticizer. We all know how bad that went. And Robotnik in most continuities had to piggyback off its invention and tamper with it instead of being smart enough to have come up with it on his own. So Uncle Chuck might be smarter than Robotnik. Sonic's uncle even gave up on being a scientist for a while, just like a simple Rick, even if it was for a different reason. The only continuities where Eggman even came close to making a roboticizer himself were Sonic Underground and IDW, where he screwed the metal virus up. So since Chuck can make a roboticizer no problem, of course he'd be capable of this. Of course he'd be so smart that even Tekno would be scared of him. But the really confusing thing is, why would he think he'd need to do this to make Sonic and Amy? Wouldn't their parents make them, and that'd be good enough? That's what usually is the case. What would he need them for? This would only really make sense if he was an Uncle Chuck from a universe where Sonic's parents weren't ever gonna realistically make a Sonic, and he was aware of the other Sonics and Chucks in the multiverse, because he saw universes ahead of time from his. So he'd know that his universe would need a Sonic to exist, so he went out of his way to create his own Sonic with science. His parents not wanting to have a kid together here would be the only explanation for why he'd make Sonic himself with science, as opposed to just making a clone of himself if he wants to have a son so badly. Maybe Sonic's parents in Fleetway died. Maybe Sonic's parents in Fleetway died with their Sonic, and Chuck needed to replace him, because he knows that he'd be needed to be a hero against Robotnik at some point. Because he's seen other universes. I know that sounds complicated, but a complicated explanation is basically the only way it can make sense, because if Chuck literally just made Sonic so he could have a kid to raise, then why wouldn't he just make a clone of himself and settle for that? Why would he go out of his way? Like, why else would Sonic be made in a test tube? Is he like an ultimate life form, like Shadow? Because if that was the case, you think he'd know all about that, like Shadow does. You think he'd have chaos control. It would explain why he's so powerful that he can go super every time he's really scared instead of needing 7 Chaos Emeralds. I can't wait to see Origins. I can't wait to see the explanation for this. So this story by Akira took a while to get going at first. Tekno wanted to research Sonic and Amy because they both got experimented on by Robotnik when he wanted to become Speedy, and both ended up with green eyes from being in Chaos. And she thankfully lampshades that she should have done this years ago. The plot twist at the end reveals that out of complete nowhere, Sonic and Amy in this fan comic are 90% genetically similar, to the point where they're probably clones, and Tekno thinks they're born in a test tube. How could she not know what clones means? If they were clones, they'd at least be the same gender and have the same hair color. Wouldn't they be 100% genetically similar? I guess the two of them are altered so that they wouldn't be. They could be fraternal twins, but clones would obviously be identical twins. I can figure out for myself that maybe Uncle Chuck needed to make a Sonic and Amy for this universe because he could discover other dimensions ahead in time from his, so he knew that this place would need a Sonic of its own to be a hero of Mobius. And he probably had a very good reason to believe it wouldn't get a Sonic without his desperate measures. Like maybe Sonic's parents in Fleetway hate each other, or on opposite sides of the planet. So this was the only way there could be a Sonic. That's the only reason he would need to be born from a test tube. But I'm worried that this isn't gonna be the explanation, because that'd be too cool to be true. Why would he make them for the simple reason of wanting to raise some kids just to never be around them afterwards, and just hide while retired? It'd make him look like a dick who realized he didn't want to be a father after all, and didn't tough it out. Well, I'd rather he make them for a heroic reason. Or again, he could have made Sonic so that he could raise him, and he just ran away because he's a scientist who does experiments. It has to be that he doesn't have a very good relationship with Sonic, or else he would approach Amy in person instead of using a drone, and lying about his name. I hope this connects with why Chuck's separate from Sonic. That would be resolving 2 plot threads in 1, because he wouldn't have contacted Amy for anything other than an extreme situation, and he was asked why, and like what's so important that this is a risk for him, and he just said that that's a long story. What's a long story? can't be Kintobor, even if he is a close associate of Sonic's, because he didn't know Sonic yet. Because we saw when he just met Sonic.